Welcome, everybody. My name is Jamal Malik. I am the managing partner for Sales Advantage. I'm really thrilled to be welcoming Hollis Williams to this show. This is another edition of our podcast where we cover various topics revolving sales. Hollis, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Hollis, before we start, could you maybe kind of share a little bit about your background, maybe any additional information you think is relevant for the discussion?
Sure. So, um, I kind of grew up in a family that was dedicated to public service, and after spending some time in the Army, I went out and worked in the commercial space quite a bit, and then ultimately ended up at Microsoft about 10 years ago, and started off in the federal space, and then went over to state and local government. So I've been in state and local government for about 8 years or so, and
All right.
currently. Sorry about that. Currently, I manage the sales team focused on state and local government business on behalf of Microsoft for about 12 states or so. And then they have influence really across the U.S.
Awesome. And Hollis, I think it's really interesting. Both you and I spent quite a bit of time in the government space, and I think specifically for this topic, what we want to cover is, what it's like to actually sell within the government sector. And so with that, I think I'd love to kind of just jump right into it. You mentioned you worked in the commercial space, you've worked in the government space. What do you think are the biggest challenges with selling to government entities?
There are many.
Where do we
I
start?
think probably the biggest thing is the motivation, right? When you look at how you define success and the measurements of success in commercial, often it's around profitability. And even when you think about your customer's customer, in most cases, it's an individual or a family or an entity that is coming to procure some service or good, and the company that they're interacting with is looking to drive a profit. When you're working with government, your customer's customer often is someone in need. And so success is having we use public funds in an efficient way to deliver a positive outcome. And when you think about where the majority of budget for government, especially in state and local, is focused, depending upon which study you look at, which analyst you look at, over 60%, 70% is focused on health and human services, things like SNAP and TANF and other assistance programs, whether it be for nutrition or other needs, and then in our justice system. And so that population of the constituents or residents or citizens, they're delivering an efficient outcome is about bringing them closer to the median quality of life within that state. So just very different focus, very different definition of success, and so it should change your entire sales motion.
Yeah, no, and I think when you talk about at the end of the day what commercial organizations are looking to get versus a government organization, obviously the outcome is going to be kind of they measure success very differently. Now, actually, I think along those same lines, let's maybe talk about how they might be similar.
Yeah, sure. So I'll tell you one thing that is, and this is not just because I'm at Microsoft, but it's interesting how they are as disrupted as the commercial sector is when it comes to technology.
Right.
I think that one of the interesting challenges around government, though, is when you look at, they have a tendency to be viewed as being behind and lagging when it comes to technology and innovation. And there are a lot of ways that is true, just the nature of policy and laws and the budgeting cycle. But what I find is for the technology, for the areas where technology has driven down cost, and allowed for greater capability and access to greater capability, greater economies of scale, there seems to be a greater interest in adopting those technologies. Um, and I have found that, while government has been slow to kind of look at those spaces, they are experiencing very similar disruptions as commercial. in their day-to-day activities. So yeah, I would say that's one of the big similarities that I see. And then from a sales motion perspective, there still is a need to gain the trust of the person
Right.
sitting across the table from you. There still is a desire and a need to put forth a good business case, and in some
Right.
cases, educate the customer along the way with the sales cycle. So,
Yeah, no, I think so. You touched on a couple of things that I wanted to kind of just, you know, maybe comment on as well. You said that there are similarities specifically in regards to how disruptive technology can be. And it really feels like there's a really strong appetite now than ever within the government space and commercial, you could argue, to really adopt technology and do things differently, make connections, get insights, make decisions, right? All of that. And so, but aside from just understanding the need, right?
yep.
You also talked about building trust as something that's very, you got to do it, whether in the commercial space or the government space. Um, do you take similar approaches to building trust, within the government space, or do you take it, would you do it differently? Like where would you start?
It's interesting. Um, I think that the right sales methods to build trust work both ways, right? Whether it's commercial or government. I do think that it is more difficult to build trust in the government space because of how high the stakes are if you get it wrong. The
Mm,
consequences are public, they impact people. Um,
right.
and while in the commercial space you're impacting people as well, it's viewed a lot of times as more impacting profit. And the marketplace is full of examples and challenges around, you know, people making decisions, putting trust in the wrong place. Um, but in government, it is very different. I do feel as though there's just a higher level of risk, higher level of cost. Um, you understand that people can lose their freedoms and lives can be lost. From citizens and the population within a municipality if you deploy technology in a way that it's abusive or in a way that it propagates unfairness or other biases. So the stakes are very high when you're selling in government. And
And so,
they're using other people's money, right? They're using the public
right.
trust and public funds. So yeah, I do. I feel like it's
So you're a seller, right? And you're trying to get in front of some BDM that you feel either has the budget or has the buying authority or some influence to leverage, your products to help the entity that you're working with. What are some methods that you would use to maybe try to get in front of that individual and then build some rapport? Like, where do you get information? Talk to me about some of the tactics you take there.
for sure. So the biggest thing for me is understanding that the customer base within the government space oftentimes they are committed to that mission.
Hmm.
While they understand that there's a portion of that conversation and their work that exists in a marketplace, oftentimes there is an intrinsic push or draw towards serving the public. And when you understand that the person across the table is looking at their time with you as a part of their labor of love in a lot of ways, you have to bring a certain level of respect and care to.
Mhm.
And I think that could be true in the commercial space as well. But I do think
Sure.
that more so when oftentimes success for them doesn't result in a huge bonus or a huge
Right.
profit. It is truly seeing the impact on the residents of their communities that brings them that extra quote unquote bonus or joy. So I would say the first thing for me is coming in and identifying what does success look like for them? What is above and beyond? You want the requirements, you want to understand their needs, but really knowing that this, the outcome that they're trying to drive, this is the due north. This is the focus point. I think the second thing for me is not making a lot of assumptions. You know,
Mm,
it's hard to really be empathetic or to really listen if you're coming in thinking exactly what the customer needs. And then I would say one of the things I challenge my team to do is really drive for proximity. The way you challenge your assumptions is to get as close to where your solution is going to be deployed and used as possible before the
mm,
sale is done,
mm,
before you get into the the prove stage, while you're listening for what the requirements are, and what changes need to happen. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for having challenging conversations with the customer and
right,
challenging the status quo, but I think it's important to get all the way down to the lowest possible level, if you will, to the front line, and have a strong understanding of how change is going to land, both the business
right,
process impact as well as the technology impact. Because oftentimes, especially in government, um, policy is established, business process connects to that policy, and the requirements for technology acquisition is tied to the business process. So you have net new technology. Before you have net new technology through old business process, you need to go in and understand the policy, understand the outcome that the
right,
policy is trying to drive towards, and then the challenging part, not a technology challenge first. It's are we doing this the most efficient way? Is the business
right.
process correct? And then as you reimagine, reevaluate the business process, you introduce new technology capabilities to help facilitate.
Right.
Does that make sense?
100%. So let me kind of relay back to kind of what I heard. I think I heard like three, major steps, right? I think the first step in building rapport and trust with anyone you're selling to, but more specifically in the government space, is really you got to understand, kind of their mission, where they're coming from, what they're focused on, what outcomes are they driving. And so, I mean, that can typically happen through a conversation, right? Obviously, just kind of sitting down, being humble, being empathetic, and kind of drawing all that out. But around gaining knowledge, what are some other avenues that someone could explore to really understand the mission of who they're trying to sell to?
Yeah, I mean, we've got there's tons of data out there, uh, on the web and on the internet, to gain information. I think that's a starting point. You got to use the resources that are available. Government is interesting to me though, in the sense that thanks to things like FOIA and public records requirements, the strategies and the data around the challenges that our government customers are going through, it's readily available.
Right.
Just think out of respect, it's important to consume that as a starting point. And I know for me and my team, something that's really important as we develop relationship with our customers is to go through a day in life, get out in the field. My agricultural customers, I've got dates scheduled to go hop on tractors and understand what's going on out for their farmers in those states. And I've toured a number of correctional facilities in the country to understand what those correctional officers are going through, what are the challenges of our Department of Corrections agencies. The same thing, with our Health and Human Services facilities as well. I think understanding what we're asking those to do, um, and the impact that our disruption from a technology standpoint will have on their day-to-day job. A lot of them are overworked and underpaid. Uh, I just think that that's really important. Right?
Yeah, no, 100%. And then when we kind of talk about like, so, obviously the first step about building trust, gaining knowledge, you talked about the mindset you kind of go into these discussions, being humble, having humility, having empathy, right? Not having any assumptions, obviously, as part of it. And then, you keep coming back to a point that I think is really powerful in that it's being really close to where the solution is going to be deployed. I've never quite heard it put in that or framed in that way. And I think it's actually that's kind of brilliant in that, if you really want to let someone else know you get it, right? What better way than to insert yourself into whatever it is that you're looking to impact? It sounds so obvious, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so, but let me ask you this though, like, so, okay, you know, I would say easier said than done. How do you go about asking permission even to, you know, like visiting a correctional facility? Yeah, sure, Hollis, come on down. You know, we'll make you lunch, right? We'll tour the workout room, right? I mean, how do you even get an opportunity like that?
So, I mean, it certainly helps working for a very powerful brand where you've got a leader like ours that is very public about trying to empower every person on the planet and every organization to achieve more, right? So, having support, my team in the field and myself, having support all the way up to the CEO helps. But I will tell you that any company that has the opportunity to sit across from a public servant and can demonstrate a genuine desire to affect change will get an opportunity to build on that by driving proximity in order to drive a better outcome. I firmly believe that. I haven't met a single civil servant that hasn't been willing to set aside some time to drive a better outcome.
That's
If you're
awesome.
willing to learn,
Yeah.
if you're willing to work on the front end, it's as simple as asking. And if you get a no the first time, be willing to ask again or ask someone else to gain that information. So when you go back in front of them, you can say, okay, now I've been in a facility. I've heard this, I saw this, and those that have worked in that space, when they hear that from you, they will know that it's true. When you can say, I went into XYZ facility and I noticed that one of the major concerns is physical security. And so there aren't a lot of objects, technology objects, that you can leave unbolted in the environment, whether it be for the efficiency of the correctional officers or for trying to help with rehabilitation and delivering programs to the residents or the inmates or prisoners in the facility. So when you go into the environment, just as a human being, pick up on things that may not be able to be related in a 45-minute view or in reading text off of a web.
Right. No, and you know, proximity is you talk about some of the similarities between selling in a commercial space versus the government space. Nothing beats, you know, being there in person, observing whatever problem that you're trying to address. And you know, let's kind of maybe bridge that gap now a little bit to, you said challenging, right? Before you can challenge someone, you have to have the credibility to kind of make a suggestion. And so everything you're talking about is building credibility. It's everything is about, you know, understanding your customer, and so you're helping get to that. Walk me through how you would challenge a government official that is responsible for, you know, providing aid to a health services program for, you know, take your pick, you know, battered
Yeah,
women, just
yeah.
to be like, so
So
how are you going to convince this guy,
right,
right? 10 years been slugging it out, and here comes Hollis or Jamal.
right.
How are we going to challenge this dude?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, right? And that's something that keeps me up at night when I think about my team is how do I arm them to have a respectful um, conversation with a program leader, and not to get too heavy here, but
No,
let's use
let's
child
get it.
welfare. Let's use child welfare for
Yeah,
example.
let's do it. Yeah.
So there are many states that have very public examples of children being lost in the system.
Hmm.
Um, deaths of children, um, and often what we find is that the caseworkers are carrying very heavy loads. They have a lot of data in those case files, but it requires human to review and to apply um, a risk assessment system of some sort. And I'm generalizing a little bit based on federal regulations and what I see done in a number of states. And so the challenge is not about why they should use our software. The challenge isn't about, pumping our brand, but it's getting agreement that if technology could take the the uh, uh, the assessments, the knowledge that they've gained, the knowledge that the experts in their departments have, the technology could reason over that data. Not that we could make the problem go away. That technology fundamentally has the ability as computers to go through more data than a human, to apply that consistent logic, and to make recommendations on prioritization of certain cases over others. Yes, you may have received a case, it may have gone through initial triage, but there may be some other data from another system, from the, you know, maybe it's from police or from some other entry point. Maybe it's from land and use that determines that this combination of factors creates a more unsafe environment than, say, a case that came in 60 days ago and is, next on the pile. And again, various states are at various levels of modernization of those systems, but the challenge would be, uh, if you could prioritize modernizing that process and bringing technology, could could we improve the outcomes for your residents and for your state? Could there be, even if there, the real challenge punch is if there were one less child. Let's say we only affected one child and there was one less death. Would it be worth it? And I
Hmm.
think we agree that yes, it would. And so that's a pretty heavy example. It's a weighty discussion. But I think one of the important things when it comes to challenging in that space, it can't be purely self-serving. It has to be
Hmm.
mutually beneficial. It's not about my brand, it's not about my technology. It's first, let's have the right conversation of yes, technology, especially cloud technology, can help you deliver a better outcome. Now, once we're landed on that from a challenge standpoint, we go through that wrestling. Then I want an opportunity to compete with my competition in that cloud technology space. But first, we got to have the right conversation that this is good for you. This is good for your residents. Um,
Yeah.
that's an example, a real life example of a
Right.
conversation.
What's interesting is that a lot of people think that challenging means like you're a bully. Like you're gonna go in there and like, oh, you don't know what you're doing and you should do it this way. I mean, sure, there's maybe extreme cases that might work.
Right.
I can think of a few scenarios. However, for the most part, challenging really is what's the three L teaching, tailoring, and taking control, right? So it's potentially teaching, look, we're doing it this way today. There are potentially some improvements that could be made where we could, provide more insights, make better decisions, as you mentioned, drive better outcomes, right? Maybe sharing what other agencies and other places are
Exactly.
doing as an example, like, hey, look, these guys are doing it this way and it's working and this is the results, right? Let's see if we can make it work here. Just inserting not the doubt, but just the consideration,
For
right?
sure.
Go
And
ahead.
and I would take it a step further, being again more specific to this this customer base. I'm clear with them that they are the experts. When it comes to the business process, when it comes to those disciplines and that mission, they are the experts. But just, not to use a cliche here, but when they're that deep and overwhelmed in the forest, they sometimes miss the trees. And
Right.
so being able to be almost like an outside consultant and share with them, hey, to the left, to the right, this is what's going on more broadly as technology enters into your industry, and not assuming that they don't already know some of this, but to say, hey, look, if you're not aware, here's some of the outcomes that we're helping other states to drive. here's some of the technology capabilities that we're looking to do to augment human capability, and would love to co-create a plan to bring that technology to what your team is doing. But first, we got to understand, we got to agree this technology can help. It may have risk. We've got to agree that you would be better off if you had this deployed effectively in your environment.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's fantastic. And we talk a lot about getting in there, building trust, educating yourself, having empathy, having humility, being there. All of that goes into having the potential opportunity, that one chance where you could insert another line of thinking. Let's just call it that,
Oh yeah.
right? And then and then building off of that into, okay, well, let's maybe do a pilot, let's figure it out, what are the requirements, here's the cost, and just kind of ushering that idea forward. So with that, talk to me about what you feel are some no do's. What are some things that should very consciously stay away from doing in terms of behavior within the government space?
Oh man, trying to pretend. This is an easy one for me. Trying to pretend that you know more than you do when it comes um, to the mission and to the discipline. You know, and because we as a company aren't deep, broad, and wide on business processes and the policies related to these missions. It's easy internally to feel like you're the expert because you're working in that space and you know more of it maybe than the engineers that you talk to, or some of the other internal management. But the biggest no do is you do not want to sit in front of a chief of police or in front of a director of an agency and think that you're going to tell them about their job or
Right.
announce some new life-changing capability that they weren't aware of. They likely have struggled with already how to go down that path, and you need to do your homework. You need to be prepared to learn. So I
Yeah.
would say going in with a fixed mindset, uh, thinking
Right.
that you've got the right answer, you've got the silver bullet, and that your way is the only way or the right way.
Yeah. No. I think it's pretty sage advice. Don't go in there thinking even if you spent 20 years in that space, just in terms of building the relationship, never act like, hey, I already know your problems. I know better than you. Even if you do, even if you have like a doctorate in that, whatever it is,
Yeah.
for the sake of the relationship and your role, always hang a head with humility, right? Always go in. I think that's just kind of general best practice, period, right?
Yep.
Well, let me ask you this though. I mean, so we talked a little bit about the no do's, and I would even say, if I could add one in there, is like don't just go in and talk about your product.
Yeah.
Your customers, especially the government space, does not care about about your product, right? You feel like I feel like you've got more to add there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got some scars early in my career from that. It's not about it, when you go in there and sell. It's not about you. There's going to be an opportunity to talk about the value that you can drive, but it's about the customer. And I would go a step further and say it's about the customers.
Yeah, especially in the government space, the customer's customer. Absolutely right. Well, then with that, I feel like I'm leading you to some good stories, and I really do want to hear them. What would you say? Oh, I mean, put it this way: it doesn't have to be like dollar amount, but what would you say is something that is your biggest success in working in the government space? Something maybe you're most proud of. It doesn't have to be like the largest,
For
revenue.
sure. For sure. So there are several, but they all kind of go around the same thing. When I can see a project go from the inception around, really nailing down the problem statement all the way through the implementation and business process change along with it, and then see the actual
Yeah,
customers.
that's actually good.
I have a couple of them, but there's one in particular that is always just kind of top of mind. I mean, it involves accounting, where the research had been done to determine where the population around this county, and the county, it's million and a half folks in the county area, and they're spread out in different spaces. But if you think about any community, there's certain areas where housing and work are kind of located at different levels, and so you get a large concentration of folks who need that assistance and as they kind of go through their life journey. And the county manager had put together a project to determine where those folks were located and to build out a true no wrong to go into these county facilities, and there would be at least one professional worker for every discipline, whether it's family services or nutritional services, medical services. And we were able to be a partner in that process to connect those systems that are a combination of local administration and state, systems, some federally funded systems, eligibility and testing, and ultimately, I got a chance to walk in that facility after we had gone live, see families come in and get tickets to be served and listen to the teller say, "Hey, not only are you being served on this that you came in for, but you also qualify for these other things. And if you have time, you can I can give you another number, put you in the queue to meet with someone in this other department." And it made sense because you got a parent with two small children who obviously took off work for that day. Now, instead of having to take off work again, drive to another facility, you can't count the amount of time, the efficiency, the impact. Um, just watching people in a facility that normally you see frustration her and just long wait lines. You're seeing people get in and get out, and so I saw the impact at part of that early discussion of the vision of both the program director and leader, them bringing in and partnering with their CIO and technologists, bringing us to the table as a partner, looking at the change in their business process, moving people and
Right.
doing things differently. And even on my tough days and there's different projects going on, I like to drive by that facility and okay, it's
Yeah.
working. You
Yeah. Yeah.
can see technology drive that positive outcome. Like I said, I've got other stories as well, but that's one of my problems. It's one that I hope
Yeah.
someone gets about. So
Yeah, I mean, it's what it's all about, and I think, and the reasons why I love you and I love talking to you, Hollis, is because, you could tell there's this real deep sense of, doing what's right, helping people out, and when you could start, with an idea, just a conversation. Hey, what do you think about this? And then for it to slowly grow and mature into a project, an implementation, a rollout, and then you kind of see the fruits, if you will,
yeah,
of what you kind of suggested. It's a pretty magical is the only word. It really does. It's amazing, right? To ideate on something and for it to come out and then obviously for it to be beneficial is a great feeling. And thank you so much for sharing that story. But with that, kind of balancing things out, what's been your biggest failure or learning?
yeah, I've got quite a few of those as well. Um, I won't go too specific because it could certainly call out some folks
Sure.
in the process. I think um, my failures have or my learnings have a consistent theme around uh, underestimating the enormity of the challenge.
Mm,
And so there are systemic problems. I think there are challenges, huge stresses and fractures in every industry, right? Every market has its sets of stresses and fractures and challenges. But in the government space, you've got political
Mm.
stresses and fractures. We have societal stresses and fractures. Um, and you know, you don't ever want to be viewed as an ambulance chaser. You don't ever want to be viewed as trying to uh, profit on the
Right.
challenges of people, right?
Right.
Um,
Which happened. Yeah,
it,
absolutely right.
it so sometimes in you know, I can think of a few, an ambition and a desire to bring the full power of our brand and technology to a challenge. The challenge looked at our technology and laughed and said, "No, no, we're generation strong, and you're
Yeah.
not going to come in with product or solution." And even with having the experts come hand in hand with us and say, "Yeah, we'll let you rattle. We'll let you get to the heart of the problem. We'll give you all the information. And we'll give you the data to help us solve the problem." The technology came back and looked at it and said, "This problem's too big."
Mm.
And that was tough. That was hard. um,
Mm.
because I felt as though um, we brought a lot of momentum and to the conversation, and we got people really, spun up and excited. And uh, we ultimately had to go back and say we've got to take a smaller bite of this. This what our original aspiration for success we weren't going to be able to deliver on, and that's humbling. It's
Right.
hard, but I would say if you're going to work in this space, you have to be willing to do that. And in some cases, not only be willing to say that we can't do it, but also be willing to say our, our competitor might be able to do this better. Um, and then go back to your engineering team, go back to your account team, and say, this is what we came up short. And if we want to drive outcomes in this space, we got to change our product, we got to change our motion. The, those are hard. Those are hard learnings. I've
Yeah.
certainly had my fair share of those.
No, and thank you so much for for taking the time and sharing that. I think um, it just goes to show whether in the government or commercial space, don't assume that you've got to figure it out. That you put in the work, it pays off. Whether it's to even if it's going through the motions and building credibility or getting the insights you need to actually kind of come up with a solution, you got to put in the work. Got to get out
100%.
there. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I appreciate that. We're getting pretty close to our time. I did want to ask you one quick, thought while we have you. So, you have spent time as a seller. Now you're a sales manager, sales leader. Tell me, still working in the government space, what are the qualities that you look for in a sales team that is going to be working in the government space?
Um, you must be deeply skilled in organized chaos, and you must have a
Mm,
deep level of patience and empathy. The organized chaos can come from, uh, you know, conflict and policy, conflict and objectives, such that
mm,
you're going in an inefficient way to get to an efficient outcome, right? So, not to
right,
speak in circles, but oftentimes things are a certain way, and you have to work through multiple agencies and groups in order to do what's right. And there seems like there's just a lot of barriers that exist. And I think in the commercial space, at times, as long as I can show you a strong ROI and agility in the market and gaining additional market share, if I can just make it make sense, I can usually get momentum and get a deal closed in the commercial space. In the government space, that's not always the case. So I look for someone who's got the patience and the ability to pull together some of that chaos, be calm, and continue to march towards that outcome. I can. There's a lot of in a technology company, a lot of information. I can teach someone technology. Government hasn't changed that much. I can teach someone the basics of government, first how to ask the right questions, listen,
right,
and understand. We all have to interact with government every day at some level.
right,
Um, and so I can teach that. What I can't teach is that, or it's harder to teach, is how to bring together both sides of the aisle, if you would, diplomacy, that bringing together of chaos to drive. an outcome, and how to do so in a very empathetic, a very human way, which is necessary in this space. Being able to have that self-awareness, have that growth mindset. Those types of skills are more challenging to find. And
Yeah.
say there's a huge competition out there.
Yeah, no, so I heard, being able to, basically walk through or navigate through ambiguity is probably a big plus. Like, hey, we don't really know what's going on, but we got to do something, right? So let's
Got to
do
figure it out.
do the most organized thing we can. You got to manage, I'm sure managing conflicting requirements is probably another one. Just having, different individuals, probably part of the same buying team that don't agree with one another. That happens for sure all the time, right? And then also like building consensus and bringing things forward, gradually, slowly. You got to be persistent. You just got to keep at it. You got to keep at it. You got to keep at it. You talk about humility, all amazing things, man. I really can't thank you enough, Hollis, for getting on and sharing your thoughts and insights about working in the government space. I'll just say that you're one of those individuals that I think has a heart of gold. You genuinely care. You make it a point to understand the individuals you're talking to, and I think ultimately that's what's in my mind made you so successful. That you care, that you take the time, that you don't cut corners. I see that with your customers. I see that with your team, and it's incredible to see all the success you've had throughout your career, and hopefully continue to do so as well.
I appreciate that, Jamal. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Any last words you want to share? Don't feel like you need to at all, but
No, I do want to just take a quick moment and thank you as well. Your commitment to ethical selling and really helping sales professionals out there do the job the right way, I think is important and it's needed. And so appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts, be part of your podcast.
thank you so much, Hollis. Hey, have a great rest of the day. I will just say it is 6 o'clock in the morning in Bellevue, Washington right now that Hollis has decided to do this. I love you so much for doing this. I know it's super early. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll talk soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, take care. Bye.